Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Maryland revenue projections are so bad that the General Assembly is considering a sales tax on funerals. Green Group opposes Governor Moore's data center development plans, and Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich is proposing a millionaire's tax. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the former county council member and founder of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp, and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. And welcome back. It was announced in December of 2023 that Maryland's revenue projections were a problem. How big a problem, you might ask? Well, so big a problem that when revised projections that were even worse were announced last week, that revenue projections fell for the fifth time since the pandemic. Alarm bells went off through a legislature that loves to tax and spend and spend and spend a little bit more. Governor Moore's proposed budget is now $500 million short, and everyone is wondering where to come up with the additional funds. House Majority Leader David Moon has the answer, however. That's to impose a sales tax on everything that moves, services, and transfers, including a sales tax on funeral services. Mark, Delegate Moon's proposal will impose a tax on virtually all services. If people hate transaction fees on their credit cards now, just wait till they see a sales tax every time you go to a doctor.
Well, this is a terrible idea. And, to put it in context of individual people, in the out years, after 2 or 3 years, this would result in an increase on average for each resident in Maryland of about $400 a year. But one of the challenges for it is so many services can be delivered remotely. It will have the impact, if it were implemented, of encouraging people to look elsewhere outside of Maryland for services so that they didn't have to pay the taxes. And of course, we're a state with borders, with multiple jurisdictions, and that's a real risk that would hurt small businesses in our state.
That's a great comment, Mark, because I hadn't thought about that. I mean, one of the proposed taxes is tax legal services. I'm an attorney, and if I had my office in Virginia as opposed to Rockville, I'm still licensed in Maryland. I suppose I wouldn't have to charge a sales tax if I'm located in Virginia. So that's an interesting concept. Maybe I'm going to, right now I'm down in Delaware right now at a remote location. Maybe I'll just move to the beach and say to hell with it. Mike. In double entry accounting, there's another means of balancing a budget when there's too little revenue. It's called cutting spending. Is this something that the legislature, years ago, the General Assembly could only cut spending on the governor's budget, not increase spending? Things have certainly changed. What's going to happen, do you think?
Well, I think we knew this was on the horizon. There were a number of articles already about the fiscal challenge that we were going to have next year. They just weren't anticipating having it this year. And so I think the challenge that the legislature is now facing is, do you take a short-term fix and do something to get you through this year, knowing full well that you've got to come up with a longer-term solution going into next year? And the reality is that whether you do revenue now or you do cuts now, you're going to have to come up with some kind of balance. It can't just be, okay, let's come up with a short-term revenue fix in the absence of the broader conversation. And so I think they're really going to struggle. I think you will see some small reductions, but I think for the most part, there will be some type of a tax increase that works its way through, unfortunately. And I think that does pose a tremendous challenge for the legislature strategically, because I don't think there's a clear plan of how we get there from here, especially with the resources required for the blueprint to be implemented. And
I also think this is a kind of a bit of a bait and switch. The bill was introduced late in the life of the assembly. Today is, I guess, Monday's crossover day. I don't think a companion Senate bill has been introduced that would support this as of yet. So I think it's really laying the groundwork for next year. I mean, this bill was introduced in 2020. It died probably because of the COVID nature of the legislature that year. I think it's really just laying the groundwork to be taken up and debated for next year's legislature when there will be a more serious deficit that they have to talk about. Mark, you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, but of course we kind of glossed over the source of this, which is paying for the blueprint. Other jurisdictions around the country are in tax cutting mode, not tax increasing mode. And the reason for that difference is that Maryland is increasing spending to a substantial degree.
Well, and I think one of the real challenges that we're confronting, and I think we'll get to this later in the program as it looks at Montgomery County, but I think statewide, our receipts are down, our revenue is down. And I think we've got to be very cognizant of that and identify what strategies we're looking for from an economic development perspective to begin to augment that and move that in the other direction. I mean, to your point, we've written this down 5 consecutive times now. And what's our bigger strategy? And I think that's the challenge. It's we can cut and we can spend. I think the investment in education is important, but what's the underlying cause that why we've had to write our revenue down 5 consecutive times?
Well, I think a lot of blue states are going through this. New York is having, it has increased its budget enormously. And I think the General Assembly just has to face some of the economic realities of our times on this. We need more money and people aren't willing to pay it. All right, let's take a look at Governor Moore's development plan. One of his proposals is receiving pushback from the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, which is a key ally of the governor's environmental brain trust. Senate Bill 474 is a proposal by the governor to build large-scale data centers here in Maryland. We don't want them all in Virginia. Virginia has something like 300. Particularly, they've targeted the Alcoa Aluminum plant that's abandoned in Frederick County. And apparently the major cause for opposition is the fact that they will have 168 diesel-fueled backup generators. Mike, access to live streaming data, that's the lifeblood these days. It's essential for business development. It's essential for life, really. I mean, you think about your handheld devices, but that takes an enormous amount of energy to produce. Is there a balance that can be achieved here?
I think there has to be. And I think it also ties back to the discussion we just had. You look at jurisdictions in Northern Virginia right now who are generating millions and millions of dollars in revenue as a result of data centers, the development of data centers. We're not doing anything there. And so you look at the activity that's taking place there, we've got to get ourselves in the game. And I'm not even so sure that we're not late to the game and becomes a real challenge for us to even trying to catch up. But we've at least got to get a toe in the water. And so I think we've got to do it from that perspective. I think there's a way that we can begin to think about how do you address the energy needs. You're going to have an uninterruptible power source. So you've got to be able to have those backups. You've got to have that to make these work and make these viable. And so I think that's a reality. I think as we continue to focus on technological applications and how we continue to refine and improve how we can use diesel, how we can use other fossil fuels, I think you're going to have to come up with a way to do that because you're not using these on a regular basis. I mean, these are backups and they have to be tested periodically, but they don't have to be run unless there's we have another issue with power. And I think that's the reality. The middle ground we've got to try and get to is how can we do that and be okay with that?
Mark, Mike just touched on the key element, which is having sufficient energy for our demands in this electronic environment. I mean, it seems to me that environmentalists who are opposing economic development because they need energy is kind of missing the ball here. Is that we need energy and energy development in order to have our modern lives fully satisfied.
But let's be more specific, and Mike did touch on this. We need the energy, but we need reliable energy. We need to be able to have the assurance that it's available in an uninterrupted way. And that is really in many ways the Achilles heel of relying increasingly on renewable power, because you have this issue where if power is not available, things will stop. And I suspect not just data centers, but individuals will increasingly be relying on backup generators to assure that they can have uninterrupted access to electricity. But you touched on it. Loudoun County, I think, is just filled, not just Loudoun, but in particular Loudoun, which is just over the border from Maryland. So there really should be no reason other than government and politics and economics that Maryland shouldn't be able to tap into this market.
Well, we're very proud of our of our medical technology centers here in Montgomery County, but they need reliable sources of energy, and you need these tech centers if you want to continue to be attractive to that community. You need to be able to give them and provide them the power that they need. I think it's just simple math at that point.
And it's interesting, natural gas is a great source of backup power to provide support for backup power, but we kind of know where we're going there as well. So it's one of these issues where it's like the balloon, you push things in a different direction. If you're going to have backup power, you also probably need to be able to allow for more natural gas installations.
Well, and I think it's the same thing we tend to see a lot, which is this notion of it's just binary, right? So if we want to do this, we can't do this. And the reality is there has to be a middle ground for us to be able to achieve this. Do we want to see increases in fossil fuels? No, not necessarily. But we also have to recognize we need that uninterrupted power source, or at least a backup. And so how do we come up with the best way to deliver that in the most efficient way possible?
Well, we could do what Georgia just did. Put in a brand new nuclear power plant. That's what we can do. That's some food for thought. It's not going to fly today, but we need more energy. When we come back from this short break, Mark Elrich proposes a millionaire's tax. Stay tuned.
Jordan knows he shouldn't eat this entire bowl of nachos, but tonight he's earned that right, because a few hours ago in the middle of happy hour, he recognized a sign, not from the gods or a bolt of lightning, but from a double heart, a kissy face, and a fourth ha in ha ha ha. That's when Jordan knew he was buzzed. So when it was time to go, he got a ride home instead of driving. Be a legend like Jordan. Recognize your buzzed warning signs and get a ride home. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Or maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.
When I first saw a turtle, my heart was full. Now I'm anything but lonely.
We had this deep connection, this heart connection.
He just wants to be close to you and part of your life.
Every day with Turtle is a perfect day.
When I'm holding her, it makes me feel calmer.
I think everything he does shows how much he loves us.
When we adopt a shelter pet,
We discover
they're a little bit of a lot of things,
But they're all pure love.
love.
Welcome back. Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich has an interesting way of making friends and influencing people. Last week, he and other progressive leaders came out with a proposal to make taxes fairer, more fair. We need more, everything needs to be more fair in life today. Increase an additional tax on incomes over $1 million, impose a surtax of 1% on capital gains, and lowering the exemption on estate taxes to $2 million instead of having it paired with the federal estate tax exemption of $10 million. That's kind of all routine stuff for an uber progressive Paul like Elrich. But then here's the kicker. In making the proposal, he accused the legislature of being in the pocket of the rich lobbyists that comes with strings attached, including the Montgomery County delegation. Mike, the latter shot outraged Senate President Bill Ferguson, one of the most powerful players in Annapolis. And he said this in Maryland Matters. There was an article today in which a number of county executives across the state questioned the motives of the members of this body. I just remind them that as often that we have policy differences here and there, but when they come down and continuously ask for help over and over, and then decide to do a press conference questioning the motives of the members of this chamber, I would encourage them to really rethink that approach. That was kind of nice, soft criticism from the Senate leader.
Yeah, no, I mean, I saw when the press conference occurred, and I really was trying to understand the rationale. 2 months into the legislative session, the month when everyone's starting to make all the decisions, the intent was to go down and effectively, you know, dump all over the folks who are making those decisions on your behalf. And it really didn't make a lot of sense, except for the fact that it's consistent with County Executive Elrich's general approach. I think I read an article that, you know, it's much more about being right than actually getting things done. And I think that's consistent. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we've been as a county under that leadership. And the reality is that, you know, I've heard him speak a number of different times that, you know, the county is limited in what it can do, and so we need more from the state. Well, okay, if you need more from the state, then you better come up with a good way to work with the state to be able to identify those resources and come up with a good plan. And so instead, he went after the folks at the state and told them that they were in the pockets of other folks, while at the same time trying to get leverage to be able to increase the ability to raise taxes locally, which he also needed their approval to do. So effectively, he shot himself in both feet at the same time.
So, Mark, there were a lot of critics, and one anonymous critic came out and said that Mark Elrich is an embarrassment. He came to Annapolis and impugned the motives of his own Montgomery County member delegation. I can't think of anything more damaging. This is the killer line. He should lock himself in Rockville and leave the lobbying to the professionals, Mel Wenger and Rich Madalino. This mistake is almost certainly unrecoverable.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty good ding, and it's interesting, the dynamics to think about of a Montgomery County surtax on upper incomes, whether it's capital gains or what have you, actually would accrue to would against the state of Maryland for Montgomery County, which is the home of probably the largest numbers of the qualified people for this, driving those people out of the state to Florida or wherever, would really be against the overall interest of the state of Maryland's revenue. And of course, if it just was going to benefit to the state, the county, I think the state government has every interest to avoid a Montgomery County specific tax increase.
You know what's interesting is that, and we're going to talk about the county budget next week when we have time, but you know, Mr. Elrich came out yesterday and said that there is no need for any increased taxes here in Montgomery County. So, you know, I think he wants to deflect away from the statements that he made by saying, well, we're fine here in Montgomery County for right now, and we don't need any tax increases. You know, we had a large tax increase the past 2 years. And, you know, but we want the state to give us more aid and support and comfort.
Well, and I think one of the challenges is, and it's always fun to have kind of the political conversation, and you come up with whoever the punching bag is of the week, and he certainly gave us great fodder to be able to go after him. But the reality is that, you know, we've got 1.1 million people in the county and there are a lot of challenges right now. We've got a county with no economic growth. We've got a county where our schools are struggling. We don't have transportation infrastructure that we need. And at a time when we should be thinking about how are we collectively looking at addressing the needs of that community. He's trying to be right, and it creates a center of attention on him and the statements that he's made, but it pulls it away from the actual work that needs to be done that isn't getting done. And as a result, we continue to fall further and further behind some of our neighboring jurisdictions. And that's the real unfortunate part about that.
Well, the one thing you didn't touch on, Mike, is the crime issue, and crime is increasing, and we are continuing to have a inability to recruit a sufficient number of police officers to help address that crime issue. I mean, Mr. Elrich, you know, I'm sorry, Mark, did you have something to say?
No, I was gonna, I didn't, but I will say, I think you put your finger on it. Montgomery County has lagged behind the other jurisdictions within the region on a whole variety of indicators. Mike touched on quite a few of the economic ones. You've touched on crime. And, you know, we should be doing a much better job of running the county rather than attacking others or talking about driving folks who are paying the bills out of the county.
You know, what I find interesting is the sub rosa relationship between the county executive and the county council. I mean, we saw the county council reject his nominee for the fire department chief. We now have a search ongoing for a new education superintendent, and again another fire chief.
And
So I mean, there's some dynamic tensions going on, huh?
And a new police chief.
And a new police chief. So we have some dynamic tensions going on, and it'll be interesting. You know, this was the first year of the expanded county council, or is it the first or second year?
Second year.
The expanded county council, and there's a changing dynamic going on in our political structure.
You know, there is, and I think the one piece I would kind of like to end with is we still live in an amazing community. We have an amazing array of assets and resources. And I think that's the part that's most frustrating is rather than being able to focus on how do you take those assets and resources and make the community stronger, we continue to kind of be sliding a little bit further behind where we've been in our neighboring jurisdictions. And when you look at that, you kind of wring your hands and go, how is this happening here? But when you look at comments like that have been made out in Annapolis and the focus on things like that rather than substantive things we've just talked about here, it becomes clear maybe why that slippage is taking place.
Mike, you got the last word. We're going to stay tuned for parting shots.
Hey world, I have a quick message. It's about safe driving. All right, let's go. Anytime you're driving, have the seatbelt buckled tight. Both hands on the wheel and your phone out of sight. When not in your hand trying to text somebody back. Because if you do, your car might get smacked. The moral of the story, just put your phone down. The people on the road will stay safe and sound. Put your phone down, put your phone down. People on the road will stay safe and sound. Yeah.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.
Jordan knows he shouldn't eat this entire bowl of nachos, but tonight he's earned that right because a few hours ago in the middle of happy hour, he recognized a sign. Not from the gods or a bolt of lightning, but from a double heart, a kissy face, and a fourth ha in ha ha ha. That's when Jordan knew he was buzzed. So when it was time to go, he got a ride home instead of driving. Be a legend like Jordan. Recognize your buzzed warning signs and get a ride home. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
Oh, thank you, Casey. You know, we've had a lot of gloom and doom that we've talked about for the last couple of minutes, but one of the great glories of our particular region is the annual Cherry Blossom Festival. This was a gift from the Japanese over a century ago and has expanded out from where it was in the trees were initially planted. And it's just a reminder, one of the great benefits of our area, being able to enjoy a spring with blossoms. And I encourage everyone to take full advantage of going out and seeing this because it is a beauty in our area.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mark. That's great thought. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Thanks, Casey. That's why I wore the shirt color that I did today, Mark, because in honor of the blossoms coming out. I've got two items. One is, as the county executive introduced his budget yesterday, and one of the real challenges that we know we're seeing at post-pandemic is our reading scores for our students. And I've signed out a letter with a number of other folks saying that the council and the county executive have at their disposal the ability to work with the school system and help structure the way the budget's put together to reorient a focus back on third grade reading in particular, but then reading initiatives more significantly across the spectrum. And so we're going to be looking for that because we think that's so vital to the success of our future students and ultimately the growth of our community and the growth of our economy. And so we want to really focus attention on that this year. The second item is I've had the benefit of being able to go down and participate in the ACC tournament and watch many of the games that have been down at Capital One Center. And the one thing it reminds me of is Mark indicated that we do live in a great region, and we have a lot of different assets to take advantage of, and how straightforward and simple it's been to be able to go back and forth to that venue and be able to participate in a regional event. And I'm not saying I'm for or against what the proposal is to move it somewhere else, but I'm just saying it's nice to be able to go to the center and the hub of our region, be able to participate in sporting events, go to restaurants, see others doing the same thing, and get home in a reasonable time frame. And I just think it's a real benefit to hear. And so I think we need to think hard about what other changes may take place in the coming years.
Thank you, Mike. I want to thank you both for being here today. And I really appreciate the use of your time. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.